attention problems may be medically diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. This is a complex disorder that requires the intervention of qualified clinical personnel, and its discussion is not within the scope of this presentation. Certainly, students with true ADHD should get the full benefit of medical treatment. But I believe that many children diagnosed with ADHD early in life simply have the symptoms that mimic the disorder, but do not in fact have the disorder. What factors could make a youngster exhibit ADHD-like behavior, yet not have true ADHD? Well, let's return to the workshop to find out the answer to this question. Now, we're not exactly sure which system is disrupted with true ADHD, but we know there's some misconnections there that make it tough for them once they do orient and attend, which is when the executive lobe gets involved, to stay with it. But it is spectral. It is spectral. Now let's go back to those kids who, and by the way, as you know, ADD now is probably going to be reclassified as a subset of ADHD because there's a growing sense of research, body of research that says that it probably ADD is just ADHD without the H. That it's just, and a lot of kids who have ADHD, that H part of it begins to moderate when they get into mid-adolescence because they meet a person of the opposite sex. And since it's usually boys, the girl says, I'm sorry, you're a nice guy, but I can't go out with anybody who's bouncing all over the walls. Either you straighten out or we're finished. They straighten out. Amazing how that happens. So there is some control over that. All right, let's talk now then. What can cause ADHD-like behavior and not be ADHD? What I'm suggesting is that we should look at these options first before we rush to Ritalin. Diet. Is there something in the kid's diet that's causing an allergic reaction? Food preservatives, aspartame, excess caffeine. One of the symptoms of an overdose is hyperactivity. So maybe this kid just needs a diet change, not a diagnosis for a disorder. Sleep deprivation is another one. As you all know, kids do not get enough sleep these days. What's the latest data done? By the way, the Sleep Foundation, you can go on their website, sleepfoundation.org, does some wonderful research in this area. And if you need to get hard data, that's where you get it. Now, what do we find out? About 48% of elementary school kids come to school today sleep deprived. By the way, that's up from 36% about 10 years ago. Once again, all the toys in their rooms and family problems and things, not enough discipline to get them to bed early. 80% of middle school and high school kids come to school sleep deprived. 80%. They're getting about 6 to 7 hours, in some cases 5.5. Those high schools that start at 7 in the morning, getting 5.5 to 6. Their body wants 8 to 10. And there's no such thing as a sleep bank. That's a myth. You know, sleeping 20 hours on the weekend doesn't make up for it. In fact, that's worse. You can have your kids sleep another hour or two on the weekend later, but not 6 or 7 hours, because that shifts the melatonin cycle, which will make getting up Monday morning even worse. So that's not a good solution. The best solution is get them to get at least 8 hours every night. Now, when you're sleep deprived, it builds up. The symptoms build up. They lead to irritability, hyperactivity, short fuse, and stress, which brings me to the next one. Kids under stress will be hyperactive. Why? Cortisol. When you're under stress, the hormone cortisol gets dumped into the blood. And remember, the purpose of cortisol is the pre-adrenaline hormone. Its job is to alert the frontal system, the frontal lobe, the executive system, say, hang on, drop everything else you're doing and find out what's causing the stress, because we need to deal with it. Do we have to fight or flight? What do we have to do to get rid of this stress? You get sleep deprived, and sleep deprived, you develop more cortisol, so you get this vicious cycle. The next one, the unprofessional term for it is pain in the butt syndrome, which I call not taught the rules of behavior. How many of you, when you were kids, used to sit down every night and have dinner with your parents on a regular basis? Yeah, and by the way, was it optional? No, it wasn't for me either. You'll be there. There's no debate about it. And that's when you were taught the rules of behavior. And also taught there are certain things you can do here you better not do in the supermarket, you better not do at school, you better not do at church, or temple, or synagogue, whatever. And you were told that, and if you violated them, you had a price to pay for that. What's happening is kids are spending less and less family time together, what we call the quality time. Let me give you the data. Data always beats non-data. And they asked them, how much time do you spend in a week on the average playing with your electronics, communicating on the internet, the telephone, texting, all that time? What they find out? They found out it was an average, and by the way, I think the number's gone up now, but in that 2 or 3 years ago, it was a 13.7 hours a week. 13.7 hours a week. Then they asked them how much time they spend in what we call quality family time, which is sitting, not just eating with your parents, talking with them, sitting down, having a conversation, how did school go today, all that kind of stuff. What was the average amount of time? 47 minutes a week. So if you do the math, that means that kids are spending about 18 times more time connecting to the outside world than connecting to their inside world. Consequently, this is not happening. So those young kids who come to school acting like maniacs, they're not malevolent, they're ignorant. We have to teach them the rules of behavior. And the final one, see, what do you think I mean by this one? School-induced ADHD. Think about this one for a moment. What could that mean? What could David Sousa mean by school-induced ADHD? Can I summarize it by saying a 2007 brain in a 1970 school? Okay. And so we've got to make sure that the schools today are compatible with the brain that's crossing our threshold. My reference to school-induced ADHD in the previous segment refers to those situations where classroom management and instructional strategies have not been adapted to the brain of today's students. Examples will include excessive lecturing, minimum student participation, few opportunities to stand up and move around the class, and little or no student discussion of what they are learning. These all have the potential for inducing ADHD-like behavior in students. Other factors can produce ADHD-like symptoms. One major study showed that the more television young children watch, the more likely they are to have trouble concentrating and become restless and impulsive. The researchers noted that although ADHD has a strong genetic component, environmental factors also play a key role. Extensive television watching may aggravate the symptoms in children who have inherited ADHD and produce ADHD-like symptoms in non-ADHD individuals.